start with the sales contract entry. And this shows us a listing of all the existing contracts we have out there. We could filter it by branch if we wanted to do that. But in all of our windows that we open up to use, you'll see some options. So like if I wanted to highlight a contract here, I could drill back and see any scale tickets that have been applied to it, or any load requests that have been done. Load request we'll touch on briefly when we set up the contract, but we have another webinar scheduled here in the near future to discuss load request in much more detail. So if I'm going to create a new contract, we'll just click the new button, and that opens up our slider, what we call a slider here. So this is the basic information that you're going to enter for the contract. So the branch is where you anticipate it being shipped from. We're not restricted by that, but it's just to get it set up in the system. The contract type, we have two contract types, and these are also user defined in the system. We just have a basis and a cash contract for sales set up right now. But you could do, you define your own if you had more needs than that. Enter your customer account. I'm going to use ADM for my example, and my commodity, we'll just use corn. So it defaults in the unit of measure, and then decide what contract quantity you're going to use. We'll say 75,000 for this contract. The next question is it a load-based contract? And if I answer that, if I leave that at no, then it's just 75,000 bushels will fill the contract. It's what it takes to fill it. If I change it to a load-based contract, then I identify how many loads I want to be. So if I say it's going to be 75,000 bushels, or 75 loads, I'm sorry, then the system knows that's 1,000 bushels of load. If it's a load-based contract, then 75 loads fills the contract. Doesn't matter if it comes up with 73,000 bushels shipped or 77,000 bushels shipped. So that's just one of the differences with our load contract. That it's a takes 75 loads to fill it. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for now. Delivery period, this is what we talked about earlier that we set up in here, and I know my delivery period, the way we have them defined, is going to be June, so it's 2020 and the 6th month. And then the ticker I want to use, we'll just use July for this example. Of course, then you enter your board price and your basis. If it's a cash contract, if it was a basis contract, all we would require entry would be the basis level. -0.1 to get our net price. So that's the basic contract information. So now if I click the create button, it's going to go out. That's our contract that's set up out there. Now our contract is in two sections. We have a header and a lines contract. I'm going to start by showing you the header information that's here. This first section gives us really the information we just set up in the slider that it's imported in. You could add a quality grade level if you want to say that this needs to be number 2 yellow corn for our contract. Additional specifications, well, our primary purpose for that would be in the best example I have is like the wheat market. So if you were buying a specific protein level or that, you could put that in here and identify it. Defaults to whatever currency we have for this customer, but that could also be modified if need be. Miscellaneous details. The trader would be who within your organization created the contract. So if I'm going to say this is Kyle Cook that did that. And then broker. So if you used a broker, then we could set that up and show that as well and create these. So if I want to go out and look, any broker, we'll just say it's Johnson Brothers and identify whatever rate. I'm going to pay him 1/2 cent a bushel for the brokerage, if that's the case. The reference number, you can enter any reference number, whatever it might be, into the system, and the same with their contract number. So if they gave you a contract number for their purchase, you could enter that in here as a cross-reference for that purpose, and then also any notes. Any notes that you enter into this box will, well, currently right now the way we're set up, do print on the contract. The contract printout can be modified, but right now those are external notes that go in. Our next section is on the contract dates and quantities. This is a per bushel contract, load based is set to no. So, but it knows the load size if we have one would be 1,000 bushels because I entered that information in the system. So it shows us our quantity to deliver still is 75,000. We've delivered nothing against it. I've canceled nothing against it. And cancel is what we refer to as an underfill. So if there was a reason why part of this contract wasn't going to be delivered, then we could process that through and it would show up here as canceled quantities. And then show us the remaining that's out there. Contract dates, it shows me the date the contract was created. You can code it to show what date the contract was sent to the customer. And then if they sign and return, if you want to track that, you can show the date that it was returned to you as well. Discounts, fees, and freight, you can assign a discount schedule to the contract. So if you have a negotiated schedule or a specific schedule for whoever you're selling this to that they use, you can put that on the contract. And the advantage to that is if you have their contract or their discount schedule duplicated and you have it on the contract, then all the tickets that get assigned to this contract will calculate discounts the same as what they will. So again, when you come to the matchup process later on, it should give you a better idea how well you're doing on that situation. So in our system, discounts are quality factors. Fees are non-quality charges. Not sure what you would have for that on the sales side, but that's what those would be for. So you may not need those. Terms of payment, again, this, whatever you have set up, this will default in with the customer. If you have it set up on the customers, we'll just say it's not 10 days. And then freight, delivery terms. These are what we have set up. These are user defined in the system. So I'm going to say this is a delivered contract. Our mark to market adjustment. So what this is for, my best example is when you bring contracts to market, if you wanted to bring them to market, say at one central location, then you could put in a freight adjustment from the location this contract was issued in and priced on back to that central location. So then when you go to bring your contracts to market, whenever you do that, you could just enter one value for the sales contracts, and this adjustment then would move all of those back to current. So that should work out for you as you need to. Then as far as the freight goes, you can enter a freight. This one shows how much freight was in the basis. So if you wanted to, if you have your base, I entered this like at 15.25 cents a bushel. If say 11 cents of that was freight value, if I put in the 11 cents here, then what the system will do is track that separately and post that when you go to invoice the contract. It'll know that 11 cents of whatever you received was freight cost, and you can code that to a separate freight account just to get you a better idea of what your freight cost was for this. That's an optional if you want to use that or not. And then also the freight per unit, you can go ahead and enter that amount here as well. So I'll put in 11 cents for that. And then the freight per unit is just information for if you negotiated a freight rate on the contract, then it would print on there as well. The freight invoiceable tag would mean if I flip that to yes, then that means I could issue an invoice for the freight at this time and get paid for that. We also have a weights to govern and a grades to govern. These are also user defined, so you can set those up as needed. We'll use destination, and then transportation modes that are available. This defaults to truck at this point. And of course, then the deliver to address comes from the customer's account. So anytime we set this up for ADM, this is a default deliver to address of Glencoe, Minnesota. You could override that if they had multiple addresses you wanted to use. And then the hedge commodity. And our purpose for the hedge commodity, now in our example, corn is fine. Well, let's say you were selling Milo and you were going to use corn as your hedge commodity. So we would set Milo up in the system to use corn as its hedge commodity, and that would show on the contract. And of course, then when it comes to our positioning, you are long and short, then we would have the option to include the Milo into the corn position to make sure our hedges are balancing out correctly. So that is the header section. So if we go look at the lines, more detail, again, it shows us the basic contract information, but then it has delivery periods. So what we can do is we can have multiple delivery periods on these contracts. Let's say I want to make this July or June delivery period 40,000 bushel. And we'll make it 40 loads then. And then if I want to add another line, I can make this the July delivery period. And so it defaulted to the remaining balance, 35,000, 35 loads. We'll say this is going to be hedged with September, and our price is $335.25 with a basis at 0.12 to get our price. So, and you can have as many delivery periods as you want. You know, I don't know if anyone is doing some long-term contracts, but if you were doing several months or a year at a time and want to have 12 different delivery periods, we could handle that as well. But that's where it shows the multiple delivery periods, and you can add and remove those as necessary. And then the last part, alternate delivery pricing. And what this does is allows us to set up, if you're going to be delivering to a different address than that Glencoe address we saw originally, I can come in here and to show me ADM's addresses, say, okay, well, this one's going to go to, if it gets delivered to Appleton, Minnesota, then my basis is going to be 17.5 cents instead of 15 quarter. And then it'll recalculate what net price. So then anytime you enter an outbound scale ticket and the deliver to address shows as Appleton, it will come and apply this price to it instead of the original contract price of 314.5. So that gives you some options from a delivery standpoint and keeps your pricing a little neater, if you have that need when it shows up. Now, the other part you can see here, where it says it's balanced, what that does is checks between the lines and the headers details to make sure our quantities agree, and that the delivery period quantities match up as well, just to make, so nobody keystroked something incorrectly and it got through. That is our sales contract entry.